Oops. Let's go.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Plow event where we're going to honor the winners of the third annual Rhina Espaillat Poetry Award. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and thanks to all of you who participated in this contest. We had a wonderful response. Over 900 poems were submitted this year, and we enjoyed so many of them. But we had to pick three, and we had to pick one winner and two finalists. And we're very honored to be joined today by Rhina Espaillat herself. And I won't speak long. In a moment, I'll introduce our poetry editor, A.M. Juster. I'll just say at the beginning that the poems that won the awards this year will appear in Plow's summer issue, which will come out in a couple of weeks. So if you haven't subscribed yet or would like to get a copy of Plow, please go to plough.com and you can subscribe right there. I'm Peter Momsen. I'm the editor-in-chief of Plow. At this point, I'll pass on the emceeing of this event to my colleague, Mike Juster, A.M. Juster, known as Mike Astrew as well. And he'll take it away from here. Just to introduce him, Mike, A.M. Juster is himself a poet, as well as a translator and essayist. He worked in senior positions for 4 U.S. presidents, including twice in the White House, and as Commissioner of Social Security. And he has an upcoming book of translations of the Canzoniere of Petrarch, which I would recommend to you all. So, A.M. Juster, I'll pass this over to you. And if you'd like to tell us more about the poetry contest and then introduce the rest of our program, we're looking forward to a wonderful evening together. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Peter. Well, the contest, to my disadvantage, has become increasingly popular. I think we went from just over 500 entries the first year to just over 700, and then to just over 900. And of course, my job has been to screen them and provide approximately 20 to the editorial board, where there's a very animated, polite, but animated discussion about who should win. The trend line suggests there'll be 1,100 next year. And I'm a little worried my head might explode if I read that many poems in a short period of time. So I may go out and recruit somebody to help me out next year. But it is remarkable seeing so many poems in so many different styles, really from all over the world. I mean, Plow does have an international readership. And so, we saw a fair number of poems from places that one might not expect. And although we have no international winners this year, we've had international winners in the past. So it's been a great honor. And I really enjoy listening to the debate with the editors. They do love poetry. They take this contest very seriously. They have good opinions. And the screen poems, I know, are in great hands when I hand them off to the editorial board. So let me start with maybe my favorite part of this exercise, which is introducing Rhina Espaillat to my left. And I'll start by mentioning some inessential things about Rhina. She's published a ton of poetry in prestigious journals. She's won a ton of awards, and you could make a good start on your personal library with the more than 20 books that she has published. So let's move on to what actually matters. Never forget that Rhina came to this country as an exile, as a young girl, because 2 of her family members took a principled stand against the dictator who was savaging the Dominican Republic. As a result, she cherishes freedoms that many of us take for granted, but also sees with a clear eye our shortcomings that many of us do not see. She was a literary prodigy whose poems appeared in major American magazines when she was a teenager, but she put her literary ambitions on hold while she raised a family and taught English in the New York City public schools. As her sons grew older, she increasingly came back to poetry and led a local poetry workshop in New York City. Her literary career took off when she retired at age 60 and moved to the epicenter of formal poetry, Newburyport, Massachusetts. There, she came out with her first book, which is what brought me to her, and for decades led the Powwow River Poets, a notable workshop and reading series with an emphasis on formal poetry. There, she recruited and nurtured many of the best formal poets writing today, including Deborah Warren, Bill Coyle, Alfred Nicole, whose house we are calling in from, Midge Goldberg, Robert Crawford, Gene Creeling, the late David Berman, and many more. As a matter of pride, most of the Powwow River poets have been desperate to win this award, but they only came painfully close in the previous 2 years. This year, however, 2 of our 3 winners, Gene Creeling and Midge Goldberg, are very much the product of Rhina's guidance and inspiration. In recent years, Rhina has also become a leading translator, both from English into Spanish and from Spanish into English. She is the finest translator in the world of the poetry of Richard Wilbur and Robert Frost into Spanish, and she is now solidifying her legacy with 2 marvelous translations of Spanish religious poetry. Both her St. John of the Cross and her Sor Juana books will be available in just a few weeks from Wise Blood Books, and those are books you should definitely check out. Let me close by noting that Rhina recently donated her papers to Burns Library at Boston College, and BC will be honoring her next September with an event with speakers such as the former chair of the National Endowment for the Arts, Dana Gioia. So keep an eye out for her new translations and for that September event. So without any further ado, here's the essential Rhina Espaillat.
Thank you very much for all those kind words and for the many things that you did not say.
Indeed, indeed. All right, so let me introduce the first of the finalists. Midge Goldberg is a widely published poet. She's a winner of the Howard Nemeroff Sonnet Award, and her book Flume Ride won the Richard Wilbur Award and the New Hampshire Reader's Choice Award for Poetry. In addition to her other books, she has written a children's book, My Best Ever Grandpa. And last year, she edited an Out of This World anthology, Outer Space 100 Poems, for Cambridge University Press. So let me just say a few words about Midge's poem, and then we'll ask Midge to read it. And then Rhina just might have a comment or two after that. So Midge's poem is Argument of Periapsis. It's a wonderful Shakespearean sonnet with an innovative line jump 2 feet into line 9 that emphasizes the volta, which sonneteers is the term for the poem's shift in mood from the first part of the poem to the second part of the poem. The poem's parallel between planetary bodies and human bodies are both lovely and often unexpected. And Midge drains her metaphor for all it's worth, rather than hopping from metaphor to metaphor, the way that MFA programs seem to teach people to do. It's a very skilled poem and one that I think that you'll enjoy. So Midge, why don't you give the poem and then we'll open the door for Rhina.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
I think after 3 years, I would get that right. The poem is Argument of Periapsis, as Mike said, and it has an epigraph. The angle between the ascending node of an orbiting body and its periapsis, the point at which it is closest to the gravitational center of another body, measured in the direction of orbital motion. Dr. Alice Gorman. We argued again today. This time, it might have been a pot unwashed, or trash day missed. I can't remember. A stupid, pointless fight, as if controlled by some ventriloquist. Slam door, start car, and leave, radio blaring. On the highway, I head north, nowhere to go but through the night sky, muttering and swearing. I drive too fast to the next exit, then slow and circle back. Just barely healed, we're shy, quiet and tentative, making our way together. Is there sound in space? We try saying what we really mean to say. I cannot travel very far from you. Yours is the body I am closest to.
Very nice.
This poem. One of the things I love about this poem is the fact about all three poems, as a matter of fact, they have this and many other things in common too. It's the fact that there's a human being behind every one of them. Every one of them has a personality, and it comes from that personality. I can feel as if I had met the person before. For example, this one starts with, "We argued again today." And that is Midge. That's Midge. She's and when you begin with an argument of periapsis, you expect something very different. You expect something highfalutin, something hard to understand. Well, I have two sons who are physicists, and they would have understood this. I don't, but I understand the meaning of the poem, the heart of the poem, and in particular, all the things that happen in it, the fact that the door has to be slammed, that there was muttering and swearing, and then that the sestet begins just the way a sestet should, slow and circle back, just barely healed, we're shy. It's the human being that I find in the poem that I find absolutely irresistible, because the metaphor that this particular human being picked is so far out of the experience of ignoramuses like me. But she has said something that every couple in the world understands. Everybody has had this feeling of, I've written poems about it myself. I had a husband and we argued a lot. And the thing that really touched me most is the end, or the middle section of the sestet, where she says, "Is there sound in space? We try saying what we really mean to say." But that's a very hard thing to do when you're dealing with something so personal, so human, so intimate as whether the garbage was taken out or the pot was washed. These are important things. And I understand the value of that line and a half, because what it really means is there sound in space, between two human beings? In that space, is there real sound? Can something be said in that space that is exactly what we mean? And that I understand, even if I don't know what periapsis is. The other kind of speech is the kind that is hard to find. The more intimate, the more important the relationship is, the harder it is to find the other way to say it, because human language is not fit for those things. Those of us who are poets and who think that we can say things with words so often end up being wrong. We need something else. We need that other speech, with maybe music. It may be who knows what else, but at any rate, every one of the three of you found the other speech for what needed saying. And that's marvelous.
Good. Thank you, Rhina. So we'll move on to Matthew. Matthew King's Advent is also a traditional sonnet, but this one's not a Shakespearean sonnet, it's a Petrarchan sonnet. So it relies on far fewer rhyme words. Matthew worked his way out of this box in part the same way Petrarch occasionally did, by utilizing what poets call rhyme riche, the repetition of words exactly the same or almost exactly the same, often with homonyms, words that sound the same but have two different meanings. In the first 8 lines, note the use of R-O-O-T-S and R-O-U-T-E-S 4 times, the use of sun twice, and the rhyme pair, very close rhyme pair of run and outrun. But even more importantly, note the inventiveness of line 11. Roots returns again as a rhyme word to reroot and reroot the poem in both senses of the term. Matthew has also added an internal rhyme that we poets call a quote unquote rim rhyme with rot and root, where the consonants are the same, but the vowel is different, a technique valued very much by the great poet James Merrill. The poem also breaks from the rhyme riche in the final line, which makes the traditional rhyme with fruits just a bit more fresh and unexpected. So with that, Matthew, thank you for this wonderful poem, and if you could read it for us.
Thanks for that really great introduction. And thanks in general, too, for all your hard work, Mike, and great care in putting this contest and this event on for now the third year. It's really an amazing thing.
Hold on for just a
Sorry?
second, Matthew. My apology.
Yeah.
I forgot that I did forgot your formal. I'm so eager to get into the poem. I don't think I gave people your bio. So let me do your bio very quickly, and then you can come back.
Okay.
So
Okay.
Matthew King has taught philosophy at York University and now does outstanding nature photography, which I urge you to check out on his website, birdsandbeesandblooms.com. Let me repeat that, birdsandbeesandblooms.com. He is published in many journals and recently won first prize in the Free Fall magazine poetry contest. Again, my apologies. Sorry for interrupting you. Go back and do your thing.
Thanks for that, too. Thanks for that great plug. So thanks to Mike and Plow. And I also wanted to say, personally, I consider it a great stroke of luck for me that Mike went to Plow as a poetry editor, because I don't think I'd ever heard of Plow before. And it's a really great, lively, intellectual community of people there who all seem like lovely human beings, too. So it's great to be a part of this and here with all of you people, and with Rhina, who is the inspiration for it all. It's just a thrill to be here. So I'll read my poem. It's called Advent. A pumpkin vine is far from where its roots first sprang into the earth. It seeks the sun, proceeding south as fast as it can run. With luck, it adventitiously reroots itself when it can find the ground, reroots itself in random zigzags to outrun the pestilence, the drooping of the sun, that stanch the flow from soon abandoned roots. It seems as though it never has to die as long as it continues on its way away from rots that chase it from its roots, adventuring beneath renewing skies, discarding golden blossoms day by day, until it finds that it's arrived and fruits.
I love that fruits at the end because it's not a noun, it's a verb. The vine finally fruits, it accomplishes something. It ought to be against the law to have so much fun writing a poem. Because you have done every funny thing that you could do. I laughed my way through it because I sensed the fun and I sensed the humor, and I sensed behind the humor what is not humor but seriousness, because it's there. It's there. You just have to dig a little bit. I love the unexpectedly strong verbs, verbs that contradict each other, verbs that, well, for instance, first sprang onto the earth. Well, roots don't really spring, but his do. And I love that. And I also love the fact that it seeks the sun. And how does it move? It goes south as fast as it can run. I have never seen a pumpkin vine running, but I can believe that this one ran very fast. And it was running so fast that it couldn't even check the map. It made roots, it unrooted itself and it rerooted itself because it had to get someplace. And I'm not sure that it knew where it was going. And I'm not sure that it cared. And that's another thing that I love, that this is a thing that loves to travel, that loves to do things, that has something to do, even if it's not quite certain at the beginning of the poem that it's going to fruit. I love the fact that the sestet offers something, sort of offers, almost promises, but not really. It says, it seems as though it never has to die as long as it continues on its way away from rots that chase it from its roots. So it has to avoid evil things. It has to avoid things that could do it harm. But what the hell? It's not a promise. He didn't say he is going to live forever. This pumpkin is going to live forever, this pine. There is no immortality. But he says, it seems as though. Every time I reread this poem, and I've read it so many times that I practically know it by heart, I'm wondering whether he wants to favor the hint at immortality, or whether he's saying it makes no difference. What matters is that you get where you're going. Then adventures, discarding. These are ways to travel. But how do you know where you're going to end up if you do your traveling, adventuring beneath renewing skies, and then discarding things? Well, I can understand discarding the rock. Nobody needs that. But discarding golden blossoms day by day. That's unusual. Everything about this poem is unusual, unexpected, surprising, and I still don't know exactly what I'm being told. And I'm going to read it another 20 times and not be sure again. I love the fact that this poem has given me so much to think about, so much to wonder about, and so much desire to read it again.
And let me just punctuate and expand a little bit on Rhina's last point. You know, having read probably 200 to 300 poems that are very explicitly religious. And again, I respect a lot of these poems, but there is a weakness that a lot of people have. They feel very strongly about some point, and they want to go from the shortest line to A to B, and it's very didactic. And that doesn't really work very well.
Yeah.
You know, it's not great poetry. And what's marvelous about Matthew's poem is exactly, or one of the things that's marvelous about it is exactly what Rhina just said. It makes you wonder, it makes you think. And that is the purpose of great art and the purpose of great poetry. And so if you're listening for tips for next year, treating me like I'm on the other end of a catechism and you're going to tell me what I ought to think, that's probably not going to work very well. On the other hand, if you approach it a little bit more like a very good preacher, and you talk about something of great wonder, and you talk about it in a way that makes you reflect, makes you meditate, makes you think about issues that are important, that's the starting point for a great poem, and maybe something where you get to be on the screen next year. So just if you're thinking about next year, this poem is a very good example for you to take to heart. So.
I love the fact that it's outrunning the pestilence. That there is pestilence, that whatever it is that exists, because this man is obviously very fond of the world, it's probably his favorite planet. But he knows that there is pestilence, there is rot. You do get lost eventually. This man could never have found this, maybe. He could have traveled forever and not have found where the right place was to fruit. But he did. So he's talking about possibilities. He's talking about the maybes, and the maybes are so important.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for that. I'm really blown away by it. Thank you so much.
Well, I guess we're out of time for Jean Creeling. No, just kidding, Jean.
Oh, let's give her a chance.
So Jean Creeling is a professor of music emerita at Bridgewater State University. Her articles on intersections between music and literature have appeared in several prominent scholarly journals, and she has published 2 books of poetry, The Truth and Dissonance and Arts and Letters and Love. She has won numerous awards, including the Able Muse Wright Prize, the Kelsey Books Metrical Poetry Prize, and 3 awards from the New England Poetry Club. Jean's poem is extraordinarily ambitious in multiple ways. She takes a couple of very complicated subject matters and weaves them together. And she has also written in the very musical but difficult rhyme scheme, particularly in English, of Terza Rima, the rhyme scheme of Dante. Her poem reflects clearly her deep love and knowledge of great music. She easily could have written a poem that merely focused just on the music of Debussy, and it would be probably a great poem. But she took on the harder task of also making it a poem about grief and memory. And as with Midge Goldberg's poem, Jean weaves a single metaphor in and out of her narrative and created a poem of great value and great beauty. So Jean, if you would honor us by reading your winning poem.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you to Plow for sponsoring this competition and for this very thrilling recognition. To win a prize named for the brilliant Rhina Espaillat is about the most thrilling honor I can imagine. And congratulations to Matthew and Midge for your very thoughtful and well-crafted poems. So here's mine. Claire de Lune, from Claude Debussy's Suite Bergamasque, in memory of my mother. There's D flat major at the first and last, but in between, a haze of harmonies yearns lightward, though the light has long since passed. I played the notes, she heard the light. The keys were mine to coax and animate. Their sound was hers to claim, a shimmer of heart's ease. And while my fingers stretched and danced and found their way through black and white, her ear would find a prism, her own light, parsed and unbound. She had a knack for joy and was inclined to wonder. Claire de Lune had mesmerized her in a spell that left me far behind. After my mother's death, I was surprised I still played it so often. I suppose the effort occupied and organized my sorrow-scattered mind. So in the throes of grief, I practiced, as if I'd impress a ghost with my devotion. And in those half-haunted hours, I mastered more, I guess, than just the notes. I hadn't thought I'd learn to hear what she did, but through some finesse of time and skill and need, I now discern the half-lit murmurings that no midnight can mute, the moon-pale promise that can turn unrest to peace, a star-sung appetite for breath. At last, I share my mother's light.
Thank you, Jane.
The fact that she chose Terza Rima tells you that she is a person with two arts. She's one of those lucky artists who has two to fall back on, and I'm not sure which is her first love, but I suspect that they're both the first love. I suspect that she has intertwined them so completely that she can barely separate them. I love the fact that the rhymes wind themselves around. This is not a poem alone, this is a song. It cannot be anything but a song coming from this particular poet. I have this experience with every poem of hers that I've read. There is always something singing behind it. I've forgotten the word. There's a wonderful word, but it slipped out of my mind like so much else. The word for mixing the senses so that you can smell music or taste a perfume. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know the word you're thinking about. I'm having
Okay.
trouble retrieving it too.
Is it synesthesia?
Yeah, synesthesia.
Synesthesia,
Yeah, that's
of
right.
course, synesthesia. I was testing you.
You passed.
Synesthesia, that's what this is about. And it reminds me of one of the people that I have loved most in my entire life. And it grabbed me immediately from the first stanza, because that was my grandmother. My grandma who wrote, my paternal grandmother who wrote poetry, who played the guitar. I don't know whether she loved poetry more than music or the other way around, but it doesn't matter, because she also managed to love gardening, for instance. And there are things about my life that have come so directly from her that this poem said, oh, this is about my grandmother. I have a room in the house that is full of plants, and every time I go into it, I smell the soil. I smell the earth, and I say, ah, here she is. And this bringing of somebody back from the dead into your life again is such a gift. It's such a wonderful thing to be able to do with whatever it is you're using to do it. Now, you're doing it with music. I tried with guitar, but unfortunately, I have no musical ability whatsoever. So I do it by listening to the music or as you say here, what is it you say? A haze of harmonies yearns lightward, so that you're listening to it, but you're also looking at the light that it creates in your mother's eyes, in your mother's heart, in your mother's life. And in addition to that, I have this smell of earth. So I understand exactly what you're doing in this poem, and I felt so moved by it that I read it and cried again. It's a prism. What you've done is to mix the scene with the herd so completely that it's as if they were the same thing. Her own light, your mother's own light, parsed and unbound. So in other words, it's the people, it's the way they think, it's the way they feel, it's the things they love. And then at the end, at last I share my mother's light, because you have brought her back into your life. This is a perfect poem. No, this is a perfect song.
Thank you, Rhina. Thank you. Thank you.
I can't hear it without doing this again. Sorry.
It's all right. Whoops. And our guest star is Parker the dog. Okay, so that takes care of the scheduled part of the event. Peter, is there anything else you would like us to talk about or address? Or?
Well, mostly just it's wonderful to hear these 3 poems, and it was really tough, reading through all the different entries and debating how to come to a result. A privilege, really. But each of these 3 poems, hearing them tonight, I'll just circle back to what you said, Mike and Rhina. Each of these poems, they leave you with these questions. What is, these very basic questions that can almost sound silly to verbalize. What gives life purpose and meaning? What is it to live truly? And those are what Plow is about. That's also why we ended up with these winners, right? As Mike said, that you're not at the barrel end of a catechism. Instead, you're led into asking and seeking deeper, and to read again and again and think more. And that's what I loved about each of these. It was so wonderful to hear each of them read by you who have written them, and Rhina, to hear your responses to them. So thank you.
It was a privilege. It was a privilege to mention these poems, to say something about them. The only thing wrong with them is that I wish they were mine.
Well, before we sign off, I want to just express my thanks to a few people. First of all, to Alfred Nicole, who's sitting just out of sight to our left, from whose house we have been broadcasting every year, and he's been a very gracious host, and we appreciate it. To Alan Kornbluth, the IT fellow for Plow, who puts a lot of work into putting this together so it's as seamless as it is. And then to a person behind the scenes who probably has to work the hardest and do the least appetizing work. So Maria Hine from Plow takes all 900 plus entries, strips them of identifying features, puts them onto this elaborate spreadsheet that I still don't fully understand, and then gives them to me to make my life easier and to make it easier for the editors to take a look at what's come in and what to do with them. So she works very, very hard and very quickly. I put a little pressure on her this year to try to get it done earlier, because I know poets get so anxious about times, and this one, we have one of the lowest fees of any of these poetry contests. We turned this around in about 7 weeks, and that's, I think, pretty darn good. And of course, the other takeaway is you don't have to pay a fee at all. If you subscribe to Plow, you can submit for free. And so if that you've forgotten to do that, you can just go right onto the Plow website and take care of that right now. So next year, you don't even have to worry about the fee at all. So with that, again, Peter's got one more thing. Go ahead. You're the boss.
Yeah, so I will add one more round of thanks, and that is to you, Mike, for reading all the entries and giving so much thought to them. And then, the final selection is done by the editors of Plow, but Mike, as a poetry editor, did the first round of judging, and that's a tremendous thing, and we really appreciate it. I would just like to point, Mike, and I think it might be interesting to just speak briefly to this. What is it that animates and kind of guides us in making these selections out of so many poems that came in that we loved? And one of the inspirations behind this contest, which we began 3 years ago, was to find poems that would would reflect the particular contribution of you, Rhina. Poetry that speaks about ordinary things, about life as we experience it, and that has the ability to communicate that to as many people as possible. And so I think it might just be worth a moment, Mike and Rhina, to reflect a little bit on that. What is it about poetry that can touch us in no other way? And the kind of poems that we heard tonight, how do they connect to that?
Well, I'd like to say something about both poetry and Plow together. They both begin with a P, so it's perfectly legal. I love Plow, not because I always agree with every word in it, I don't. But when I don't, I know why. And I talk back to it. And I feel that I have been spoken to. I've been spoken to with respect, with admiration, with understanding. I am never told to, never mind what you're saying, you're not making any sense. It's an intelligent magazine, and intelligent in the best sense, which means that it communicates, and it means to communicate. I like it for that. I like it for the fact that it attracts people from all sorts of lives. People who, I don't know, who are very religious, who are not, who are religious in their own way, who disagree with some of the social changes today and who agree with some of the social changes today. I have never seen anything in Plow that sounded angry. And that's a wonderful thing. And that's a very rare thing. So that's good. And I think the same thing is true about good poetry, that it communicates. It means to get under somebody else's skull. It means to make room for the other fellow. Oh, that's and poetry ought to do that. Poetry is, I think, it's the first gossip of the human race. It's the first music of the human race. It's the first attempt at communication. It's the first attempt at being what we are, one family, one huge family. And we don't always agree with each other, but it doesn't matter. We love one another.
Let me, I can't compete with that. So what I'm going to do is retreat to a little bit to the nitty gritty of my duties as assigned and tie them in to answer the question. So my charge is to come up with about 20 poems as finalists. And one of the things that I try to do, which is kind of harder than you might think, is, I have a aesthetic for my own poetry. If you go out and buy my books, which I encourage you to do, you'll figure out what that aesthetic is. But I feel very strongly that I've got essentially a fiduciary duty here, that it's wrong for me to impose my full aesthetic on the competition. So I try to be very careful about being open to writing that's very different from what I myself would write. And although we had 3 formal poems win this year, the final, I think I came up with 18, if I remember correctly. This year, I believe it was 9 and 9. And the 9 non-formal poems had quite a range of style. And what I try to do when I go through the first time, and I get a cut down to about 40 on the first take, and then the next cut is probably the hardest part that I have to do. But to get on to the 40, there needs to be aspects of the poem that snap my head back and say, wow, that's great. And that can come in a number of ways. It can be the overall idea of the poem. It can be the use of imagery. It can be creative use of language. Hopefully it's all those things. And then there's a really difficult process of taking poems that are really quite good and saying, but you know what? There's this flaw here. The metaphor gets inconsistent. There's a grammatical error and disconnect in line 12, those kinds of things. And so, you feel a little badly about it, but you have to narrow it down. And so it really comes down to having something worthwhile to say, to make your readers think and meditate. That's really important. And then the second step is to really have some craft, to say it in a beautiful, well-crafted way. And that can be any style of poetry. And that's really, I think, what I'm looking for and what I try to do and what I'll try to do next year, along with my new helper. And we'll, try to do the same thing. So if you're thinking about the contest for next year, that's kind of the thought process for the first step. And then again, I can't compliment the editorial board enough, because when we first put this together, I hadn't seen something like this happen before, and I haven't dealt with journals where there's a fairly large number of people and everybody is so passionate about poetry that they'll really read all the entries very carefully. I mean, they pick up things, both positive and negative, that quite frankly, sometimes in the blur of having read so many, I've missed. So I have enormous respect, for the selection criteria of the board, and really I feel like I don't really have to guide them very much, that they usually get more or less to what I think the right answers are without my having to say explicitly, where I think they ought to go. So, I mean, occasionally they pull an opinion out of me towards the very end, but not that much. I mean, they are really very independent and they want to do this in a way that will make Plow proud. And I think they've done a very nice job with it.
Well, thank you. And this has been a wonderful evening. And yes, I would be remiss not to, again, encourage you to check out Plow if you're not familiar with it. And again, most of all, congratulations to our 3 winning poets. And we're so glad and so honored to publish your poems. And thanks to all of you who may be watching who participated in this contest. Many of the poems that came in, we really appreciated and kind of hated not to be able to give some type of recognition to, but we sure appreciated reading them. And so check out the magazine if you like, and continue to read poetry. I encourage you to read the poetry of our 3 winners tonight, and of course of Rhina and of Mike. And thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you for making this possible.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
So we'll close out and see you all again next year for the 4th Rhina Espaillat Poetry Contest.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Oh, that was fun.
Yeah.